Okay. Sorry, I was a few minutes late today, mostly due to, let me check my audio, making sure that I can be heard. Testing. Okay, seems like you guys can hear me all right. Testing. Okay, seems like you guys can hear me all right. All right, cool. Test. Okay, double checking Facebook before I continue. Facebook is on. And then double checking YouTube. Then we'll be good to go. Okay, we're showing up on all channels. Good. Okay, so I guess I can get started. Okay, so today what I would like to talk about, well, first of all, thank you very much for tuning in. What I would like to get started on today is Pavlovian psychology. Now, I've been looking heavily into this for years. Back when I was first introduced to the concept of peaceful parenting by YouTubers, such as, but not limited to, people like Stefan Molyneux. Now, say what you will about Stefan Molyneux, that man had some solid points about peaceful parenting and the value of peaceful parenting, right? So I would consider myself a peaceful parent, right? I do not advocate, and I can say this, I can look the camera dead in the eyes, I can look you dead in the eyes. I do not believe in beating my kids. I try absolutely everything in my power to come up with some way other than to do that, right? And that's also in alignment with my own Norse beliefs as well. Now, contrary to popular belief, as depicted in many previous media publications, it was actually against the law, if not a general sense of honor, to beat a man's wife or his children, because it was considered a sign of weakness if you could not rule your own household through the sheer value or weight of your own honor. And that's an ancient concept that I absolutely hold true today in my own home. With that said, that begs the question about how to discipline one's children, right? And that I touched upon this in an earlier live stream, I think last week, or at least maybe 2 weeks ago, in which I was discussing with a commenter named John about the holistic value of zooming out and viewing your child's behavior as the manifestation or output of your household as a system. Like, for instance, it's not just that your child may do one thing and may think like one bad thing, and that is to be treated in and of itself as its own isolated incident. Many times, and also before I go further, that's what a lot of abusive families do, or at least a lot of abusive parents. They are one way in public, but they're a different way in private. And then when their kids start acting in accordance with how the closer reality of how things are in private, the abusive parent will try to pretend like, oh, that's just, how dare the kid, and they start to shift the blame to the kid, hoping that people get distracted by the kid's behavior without blaming the parent for why the kid is the way that it is, right? So in Western society, it is generally an accepted notion that you are not just simply a member of you're not just simply an individual, but a member of your house. And your house is, in and of itself, a holistic system for producing a certain caliber of character. And the head of the household is the primary person responsible for that. And it is with that in mind, it is my personal philosophy to ensure that I do not lead with violence. But that I've also spoken at length many times about how there is, despite that, there is an underlying fear in me that there's both respect, admiration, love, but there's also fear, and that fear is not, if I may speak on it. And of course, when they grow old enough to have their own social media accounts, I'm sure you'll hear about it from them. But my take on it thus far is that the primary source of any fear that my children have is not from the initial fear that I'm going to hit them, because I don't. Right? In general, I'm very against hitting, unless it's like, the only exception is when, like, if you have a kid that's like, and this hasn't happened in my house, I'm just thinking of a hypothetical. If you have a kid that's like threatening the life of another kid, like something severely wrong, and then you have to hit them to sort of like instantly diffuse the situation, right? But that's more of like even in that context, that's more of like a self-defense, sort of like you're trying to rescue it. Like there's just, I don't know, there's a lot, there are some hypotheticals in which I think it's okay, right? But those are some rare one-off hypotheticals that, even in those situations, imply a systemic failure that needs to be addressed, even if that failure is genetic. Like, for example, psychopathy in kids. A lot of that is genetic. Like when you get your Jeffrey Dahmers that are known to like torture animals when they're kids, right? A large part of that is genetic. Bipolar disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, a lot of that is genetic. A lot of that's blood-based. So that begs the question pertaining to the variables of parenting beyond which that parent can actually control, which then segues into what I said to John about 2 weeks ago about the holistic system of parenting and the caliber of character that it produces. With that said, I think the discipline of a child begins before the child is even born, by first observing the quality of character that the parents even are. Like, for example, if we look at a child as analogically food, let's say with stir-fry cooking, right? Or whatever, it doesn't have to be stir-fry cooking. That's just the Asian influence in me. But any kind of cooking requires a mixture of ingredients generally. The quality of your ingredients yields the quality of the product, the quality of whatever dish that you're creating. So if you have shitty ingredients, or in other words, shitty DNA, or you have disorders, maybe they're a product of incest or whatever it is, you're going to get problems. You're going to get genetic problems. Right? And I might be vilified for saying that, but it's true. Like the DNA that you are working with determines a whole lot, from your IQ, personality traits, any disorders, the overall health, the physical health. There's so much to do with genetics that ties into the creation of a child, that really your parenting, when you understand that and you don't run from that hard scientific truth, parenting then becomes more of a product of, or should I say, a process of treating your child like a flower that blooms. And your parenting is no more than how you cultivate that flower into its blooming. But a lot of people get that mixed up. They try to think like, okay, they think every single child is a blank slate. Tabula, I believe the Latin term is tabula rasa. And I think that's absolutely wrong. Even if it's Aristotelian, Aristotle wasn't correct on everything. He was correct on a lot, not everything. With that said, we are born with pre-installed genetic memory and activated or deactivated genes that give us a variety of strengths and advantages and or disadvantages, depending upon a multi-angular case-by-case scenario, which is uniquely different for every single person, regardless of their racial makeup or whatever it is, even though their racial makeup also ties into that, right? So that's what I mean. It's like multi-angular. With that said, if we are honest with ourselves about even that which we don't want to be, even that a lot of us don't want to face, about the realities of the character of a bloodline. If we do face that reality, then we can take a more honest approach, a pragmatic approach to what parenting is, right? So before the children are even born, what are the ingredients? Not AKA, what are the genetic components? What is the DNA of either parent? What ingredients are you putting into the pot to produce the dish that I'm analogically referring to as a child? Okay, start there. Are you using quality ingredients? Right, and that begs a lot of a controversial question pertaining to what are quality ingredients in humans. What is bad? What are bad genetics? What are good genetics? They absolutely exist. I don't care if people think me a Nazi or whatever. I'm not saying that blonde hair, blue eyes is necessarily supreme. I'm just simply saying there is, regardless of your phenotype, there are healthy and unhealthy versions of every respective phenotype, right? So, with that said, once the ingredients are squared away, then, by squared away, I mean once we have a clear idea of the ingredients, the DNA that we are working with on both sides of the family, that already sets the foundation for the personality and abilities of the child for the child to be for the child in question. And as I said, a lot of that's predetermined. Now, once that's squared away, once that's on the table, then Pavlovian psychology is how I have managed 90% of my parenting. When one of my children does something I like, I thoroughly reward them. When one of my children does something I dislike, I do not reward that behavior. It's as simple as that, right? And so what occurs is, especially when you have multiple children living under the same roof, in the same vicinity of each other, when they see daddy approving what one child does, that sort of creates a ripple effect throughout the entire tribe, so to speak, and that makes the other children want to follow suit and to get the same or similar rewards for the same sort of behavior, which is why the head of the house, or should I say the heads of the house. Now, I am the number one. Like if we were to think in purely ranked terms, I am in fact the highest ranked in the house. My wife, while my wife could be argued as the second in command, right? I am the definitive leader in all the final decisions that are made in the home. I am the head of the house. But at the same time, that's not to say that my wife is a subordinate either. We form a symbiotic relationship in which, okay, somebody has to take primary responsibility for the well-being of the family, and thus take the primary lead for the culture of the house, so to speak. And that guy is me, right? So with that said, when I reward one of my children for something good, and I'll give a use case example. When I put my keys in the front door, and they come to greet me, I don't have to tell them, you must come to greet me at the door. No, it's ingrained into the culture of the house that when daddy is approaching the door, or when daddy comes through the front door, say hello. If you're playing video games, get off the video games. Say hello to your dad, right? Especially if he's bringing home groceries or something like that. Like, thank you for getting groceries, right? Appreciate what you have. And there are different ways that I apply this, that I have cultivated a culture like that of appreciation and gratitude in my house, and namely what I call a table knocking tradition. Now, originally, before any children were born, this started off in theory pertaining to, and I really hope more parents take this idea. So if you don't feel like you're committing cultural appropriation or something like that by taking this idea and applying it to your own homes, please do, if it helps you to really understand and bond with your children. So I have invented a tradition. I've invented a tradition for the utility of truly understanding my children, and as well as my wife, every single member of the house. And I've referenced this vaguely in other live streams, and it's the power of the dinner table, And as the name of the stream is, the power of Pavlov in parenting, everything that I said earlier, prior to this, in this one respective live stream, is going to apply throughout. You'll see how I pull everything that I said from the beginning and rope it around to the power of how I built the culture of my house without violence or anything like that, right? Just holistically. The movie First Night, starring Richard Gere and Sean Connery. There is a scene in which Sean Connery, playing King Arthur, walks into his chamber, his I forget, I don't know what it was called, but it's the Chamber of the Knights. And they're all sitting around the round table, and as the king approaches, they knock. Right? They all stand and they knock. And throughout this process, I've thought heavily about this scene, and for some reason it's stuck with me since childhood. And that they are showing respect for the king in the same exact way that you're supposed to stand whenever a superior officer, a commanding officer, enters the room in the military, right? So if the kids were to be considered NCOs, and as me and my wife are to be considered superior officers, then it is correct, it is proper, even though we're not the military, we're just speaking analogically. I don't actually require the kids to do this. It would be hypothetically consistent for the kids to stand when a parent enters the room. Now, I'm not that strict about the tradition, but I'm not that strict about applying military protocol, but I did take a morsel of it for this respective tradition that we have almost every night at the dinner table. So I don't require my kids to stand every single time I walk into the room, but I do require them to stand when I approach the dinner table. And regardless of whether I was the one cooking that night or if my wife was the one cooking. And as I approach the dinner table, I have them knock. It is taken straight from First Night, Arthurian legend, as though the children themselves were knights of the round table. And we literally do have a round table. Our table is actually round. So the kids sit around the table. I approach the table as dinner is ready, and they stand and knock. My wife does as well. What purpose does this tradition serve? Is it just simply to glorify me as the leader? Absolutely not. And this is where we get into servant leaderhood. Servant leadership. I can tell, right, and in reference to the Jordan Peterson Eye of Dominance, a lot in that which is unspoken about my children's as well as my wife, their emotions, and how that will set the tone for the conversation that we have at the dinner table that evening by both what they say and what they don't say. Are they giving me a weak knock? Are they giving me a strong knock? Are they slouching? Do they refuse to rise? Do they refuse to knock at all? Which they don't have to knock, by the way. They don't have to do this. But if they don't, it makes them stand out. And then that is what I'll lead with. Like, as far as the conversation at the dinner table, why didn't you knock? Now, granted, I've never had to do this. I've never had to ask them why haven't they knocked, because at this point, 10 years into the family that we built, they just do it automatically, right? Nobody actually questions. There's no rebellion so far. It's just simply the culture of the house. So I look at each child, as well as my wife, and their body language as they're standing. Is there any hesitation to knock? Are there any micro expressions of resentment? Is there any sadness? Whatever it is, I gain, even from the sound of their knock, how confident it is or how weak it is, what they are and aren't saying throughout the conversation that night. I can tell a lot about the overall status of my family and how that holistically ties into my status as a leader. Am I doing my job correctly as a father and as a husband? Because if the morale of the family, if the morale of the team drops below a certain point, it'll reflect in their body language, even if they try to pretend like I'm doing a good job. Like if they're trying to smile on my face, there's only so much you can hide if you're really paying attention to your family, if you're really paying attention to your wife. It's like all the stories that you might read on Reddit or have randomly pop up in your feed about people claiming, whether they're male or female, doesn't really matter what sex we're talking about, well, they claim like they didn't foresee that their wife was going to cheat on them, or their husband was going to cheat on them, or they could never see that their child was going to be a psycho killer, or they just couldn't fathom that their child would break the law here and there. It's like, no, there were signs, but were you paying attention? Were you the eye at the top of the metaphysical hierarchy, actually paying attention to each of your family members? And when you catch an anomaly pertaining to their emotional state, do you address it? Right? And I referenced Jordan Peterson again. Jordan Peterson has a video in which he reads a storybook. I paraphrase the title. I don't remember the title exactly. It's "There Are No Such Thing as Dragons." I think that's the title of the story. And the story in a nutshell is there is this willfully blind mother who tells her child that there are no such thing as dragons. Yet the child can clearly see a dragon, and the dragon throughout the story grows until it takes over the house, literally takes over the house. And it could have been stopped if the mother had simply willfully faced the harsh reality that there is in fact a dragon in her house. There is a problem in her house, and it needs to be addressed while it's early. You need to slay the dragon in its cave before it comes to your village, right? Again, reference to Jordan Peterson. Say what you will about Jordan Peterson, the man makes a strong point about family dynamics here. With that said, I use the table tradition not in an egoistic or narcissistic sense, but as a genuinely useful conduit for observing any potential dragons that I need to slay right then and there through an uncomfortable conversation that I need to have right there at the dinner table. And that's bravery that a lot of families don't demonstrate, because what happens, tying into why so many families tend to fall apart, why there's such a high divorce rate, is that a lot of times people don't want to believe that there might be something wrong. Whereas that's what I'm constantly searching for. I don't want to be that willfully blind parent that thinks that his daughter is a perfect angel, right? Or that his son, his firstborn son, can do no wrong, right? That you see those dynamics in the Mad King of Lord of the Rings when it comes to Boromir and Faramir. Boromir could do no wrong in the Mad King's eyes, and Faramir was always wrong no matter what he did. That's not me, right? And whenever I see that, I'm thinking, okay, I face the reality that could potentially be any father of any family, any patriarchal leader of any family, but because I'm willing to face that, right, the same dynamic of checking myself, I'm able to use this dinner table every night as in an almost analogically judicial manner, to analyze both what they're saying, each member of the family, including my wife, what they're saying and what they're not saying, as necessary to get a very strong meta-analytical perspective of the status of my family. And if there is a problem, if there is a dragon that needs to be slain, I do it right then and there, the very night of that dragon's discovery, in whatever is anomalous about their body language, their vocal tone, or what they say. And that is how I set the tone for everything else, the ripple effect of the family pertaining to Pavlovian psychology. Now, if I am doing everything that I'm supposed to do, and that reading, that meta-analytical reading from the dinner table shows me that the family is at a minimum level of morale, right? That we've exceeded a minimum level of morale collectively as a tribe, then that gives me grounds to reward that which I see not as illusory, but as the truth of how they really feel. If I approach the door, going back to what I said I was going to rope around. If I approach the door and the kids approach me with genuine enthusiasm, like I can trust that enthusiasm is genuine, because I can't see any dragons. Nobody's reported anything to me, and even if they haven't reported anything to me, there's nothing indicating in their body language or any pertaining to how they knock at the table that would lead me to have any sort of genuine evidence to corroborate the claim that they are disingenuous or facetious in the respect that they show me, that I have genuinely earned and maintained their respect. And then as I have maintained a minimum level of respect, or exceeded, should I say, better rhetorically put, exceeded a minimum level of respect, that makes the power of my positive reinforcement for whatever behavior I want to continue and proliferate setting or throughout the culture of the entire house all the more powerful if I know that I am genuinely respected at this level. Then that the potency of my compliment it hits that much harder. Like, Dad really appreciates me. He really appreciates when I did this. And that makes all the other kids say, you know what, I'm going to do that too. I'm going to behave that way too. And then all of a sudden you have, for the most part, holistically, a certain quality of character that is morally clean, disciplined, and sustained, internalized truly within the kids' psychologies, based on respect and honor, without me ever having to raise my voice or to raise my hand to hit someone. Right? Now that's positive reinforcement. Now that's, in the ideal world, that would always be the case. Now, but that's not, let's be realistic. It is a natural part of, let's say, a toddler's psychology, or a young or growing kid, to experiment, to push the boundaries. What if we have a rock, as a matter of fact, we have one kid called, we nicknamed the rock star, because he fits that type, where he just likes to be a rebel for the sake of being a rebel, right? Yet when I enter the room, he tightens up his behavior, but when I leave the room, sometimes he will in fact deviate and break some rules. Now, with that said, what happens when that occurs? Especially when you're dealing with a younger kid that may not have the reasoning capabilities or the self-awareness necessary to understand the greater implications or ripple effect of their negative behavior. How do I handle that when things just simply don't fit the ideal in a vacuum? And the answer to that is yes, with negative reinforcement. Right. Some parents are completely anti-negative reinforcement, but and no, I'm not saying hitting your kids. I said negative reinforcement. What is an example of negative reinforcement? To be very specific and transparent. An example of negative reinforcement, in my eyes, could be simply banning sugar for the kid. You're not allowed to eat sugar because you behave like X, Y, and Z. Right? And when I say sugar, no sugar, I mean no sugar. I mean carbs as well. That means if we're all eating burgers, that means you can't have a bun, because bread is a carbohydrate, which is complex sugar. So you can fulfill all your caloric needs, and you essentially go ketogenic, which is objectively, technically healthier than how we're eating. But it is symbolic, and the kid gets the point. Where like, no, you will obey the rules of the house. You're not going to grow into someone that we don't like being around for your own good over the long term. Or no, you're not going to play video games. And I'll take the plug if I have to. Right? By take the plug, I mean literally take out the plug, and since there are two ways to connect it, both the wall and into the console, you unplug it from the console, you unplug it from the wall, and you wrap it up, and you put it into the closet somewhere where they can't reach. So like objectively, you know that they cannot play games. They cannot, while you're not in the room or whatever. So the thing is though, here's how you balance, at least in my opinion, how I would balance positive with negative reinforcement. And that is, they can shorten the time. However, let's say if I say you can't play video games for 3 days for whatever reason, make up a situation. I say, okay, well, your punishment is you can't play video games for 3 days. With that said, they might get off punishment well before the 3 days are up if they demonstrate quality character that makes up for it. So their sentencing might be for 3 days. 3 days, no video games. But if I see instances, or if I hear about instances of genuine quality content of character, I will absolutely wipe their sentence clean and say, okay, you're all punishment. You earned it. That because if they hit the holistic point of character correction, and it is genuine, it is sincere. If my wife tells me that she thinks that X, Y, and Z is sincere, if my wife hereby recommends to the court that, X, Y, and Z pertaining to the defendant, I will accept the prosecutor's argument and say, okay, I'll accept the plea deal. And I'll say, okay, you know what? Maybe one day of punishment was enough. Maybe you can't. Maybe if you truly understand the reason why you were punished from playing video games, then I see you have therein been rehabilitated, thereby rendering any other punishment moot. Right? So you understand that there's the function to why there is this the system of negative reinforcement in place, while balanced with positive reinforcement. And the reason why I advocate this is because the parents that are hardcore positive reinforcement will give you a bunch of empirical data about IQ levels and how, like, oh no, negative reinforcement might stress the kid out, and this, that, and the fourth. And maybe they're right. However, there is far more to a person's character than merely their IQ or merely the bragging rights in today's society involved with being able to say that you have raised your children without any kind of negative reinforcement at all. Right? No, when I say negative reinforcement, again, I'm repeating myself. I'm not talking about hitting your kids. I'm talking about negative reinforcement. So with that said, yeah, you might optimize your parenting and the cultivation of the seed, your seed that grew into this child, the flower. But what if what you cultivated was actually an arrogant Venus flytrap? Right? Your kid might have optimized for IQ, but that doesn't mean that while you have optimized for IQ, that your child has the character, the content of character necessary to apply their IQ in good ways throughout society. Supervillains they also have high IQs. You do realize that, right? So it's like your intelligence is a power, and your power can be used for greater goods or greater evils, right? So there's so much more, and this is the flaw with a lot of what Stefan Molyneux was saying. Even though I'm pretty sure he would clap back at this, because he absolutely advocates the categorical imperative and genuinely moral behavior. Sure. But even though people like Stefan Molyneux have argued for this holistic moral character on the basis of peaceful parenting, when you look in his comment section, you'll see that a lot of his followers do not get the whole message. People like me do. I have the intellectual capacity to get the whole message. So what I'm saying isn't really criticizing people like Stefan Molyneux. It's criticizing the people who hear only what they want to hear in the arguments of people like Stefan Molyneux or other those who have been public advocates of peaceful parenting. It's like, okay, yes, IQ is absolutely important. It's a huge, if not the number one empirically measurable factor in how well you thrive in Western society. No arguments against that. All I'm saying is that there should be heavy consideration for the caveat pertaining to IQ is not all of one's character. And if you're optimizing for IQ so highly that you completely ban negative reinforcement from your parenting style, you might actually create the very opposite of what you narcissistically envision in your own parenting, because evolutionarily, negative reinforcement to some extent or another is natural. It's natural. Even all throughout, with every single creature that has any sort of sense of itself in its respective ecosystem will experience some level of stress or loss throughout throughout its own respective coming of age. Right? So I advocate for both a balance between positive and negative reinforcement, well placed, with plenty of opportunities for the kids to alleviate or even eradicate, to neutralize the sentencing of any kind of negative reinforcement, while tripling down on positive reinforcement to proliferate or encourage more of the behavior that you actively want to see in your child or children. And that is the power of Pavlov in parenting, right? This was a 40-minute. Sorry, I lost track of time. Right, so And so far, it's worked wonderfully. I use the table knocking tradition to gain a meta-analytical, clear eye on the status of my family, as necessary to understand how to apply Pavlovian psychology in creating the culture, the household culture that I want, in alignment with reality rather than a narcissistically delusional dream. Questions? You are the CEO and she is COO. Yes, Nancy, that is correct. All right, around 3 or 4 boys gets a jolt of testosterone, and it shows in their behavior and risk taking, which includes boundary pushing. Yeah, right. So like 80% of the time, it is the ideal. We're like, okay, everything's functioning well. The family is very peaceful, well-organized machine. But when we have, and as we do have multiple boys, right? Boys will be boys, right? It's like they will push the boundaries. They'll get into fights. They'll do certain things. They'll be boys, right? And I allow them. I encourage them to be boys, right? I don't want them to be docile. I just want them to be disciplined. There's a difference. Discipline does not equate to being docile, right? So I fully encourage them to be boys. We roughhouse. We do all. Yeah, sure, right? But when it comes to respect, then everything that I said throughout this call applies. All right, so checking let's check YouTube. What's going on with any comments on YouTube? Sure. Right, but check it. Well-being of your people by practicing what was white norms. A lot of these things have been erased, is how I would communicate this practice. You're very astute when it comes to leadership in your family. The well-being of your people. Honestly, we are white. You haven't seen my children. I'm the only arguably black person in my entire family. Like even in my family of origin, I'm just that one-off darker skinned person, and that's in relative comparison to even other black people in the world. It's like so no, we're classified a white family simply because I am a phenotypically black dominant doesn't mean the rest of my family are. I am the only black person in my entire household. Every single other person is white dominant European in phenotype. So I don't know what you mean by your people. But I can see the heart of what you intend to be a compliment. And I accept it. Thank you. Okay, Trax says, do you think the divorce rates have a lot to do with the culture you grew up in? Yeah, sure. But that is, actually, I could turn that into another video, to be honest. But in a nutshell, to address what you've said here, define culture, because what is American culture? And I do believe that there is such a thing as American culture, right? So don't give me, because that's, to understand that question, what is American culture, is what a lefty often leads with. But no, like really, what is American culture? Does it exist? Yes. And I think the core traditional American culture is libertarian in nature, based upon the Constitution of the United States, right? That's the foundational American culture, founded and developed by white men, by majority, right? So that is just the harsh historical reality of what American culture is. Now, once you have that set as a precedent, everything else that expands from that involves a large nationwide ecosystem of subcultures and languages that have flooded into America from a variety of different sources at different points throughout American history, and blurring the lines of what American culture really is. But foundational American culture is thus. So when it comes to the divorce rates in American culture, the foundational American culture, yeah. So it's like what has toxically influenced culture, right? And that has, like I said, I would need a whole other video for that. Like we could talk about the psychological effects, the sociological effects of birth control, and how and the feminist movement, how that did a number on society. not even another video. We would need a video series on that. But my short answer is yes. Do I think that divorce rates have a lot to do with the culture one grows up in? Hard yes, right? Plenty of caveats, but short answer, hard yes. Maybe I'll turn that into another video or even a series of videos after. Okay, LLL says correct. I would use the term biospirit as pertains to all our genetic character in the wrong environment or biospirit is harmed. Sorry, I know that I didn't communicate it well. Your people as in your Nord community. Gotcha. Okay, right. Okay, so checking for any further comments. Refreshing. How are we on Twitter? I don't care if it's called X. It's Twitter to me and will always be. Your boos mean nothing to me. I've seen what make you cheer. Let's see. That's good. Area pages. Okay, I'm on the go, but speaking of biosphere, can you share what that is? And can the biosphere be developed, or is it more or less fixed? How far can it be developed? My wife is making... Okay, so my wife just sent me a WhatsApp message. You can't see it on the live stream. She said, hit the cash app. She's making fun of Dr. Umar Johnson, because he's going through a lot of stuff right now. Okay, so I didn't use the word biosphere. That's not terminology that I would use, Area Pages. That was what somebody else I was reading their comment pertaining to biospirit. However, while I won't pontificate as though that is my vernacular, I will share my perspective on what may be the same idea. Okay, so here's what I think about bloodlines and why a certain level of collectivism is not only inescapable, but a de facto element of existence and is natural and good. Now, so is individualism to a certain extent, just like how I say balance. Positive parenting, a positive reinforcement with negative reinforcement, the proper balance. But I'm also, in this context, I also believe in a proper balance between individualism and collectivism. I'm an extremist of neither nor. So with that, hit the cash. I don't know if other people watching this know who Dr. Umar is, but that's another video that I could go into because he tried to illegalize my marriage. So we don't. And besides, I married a white woman, so people like Dr. Umar would hate my guts. But either way, bloodlines. I view one's bloodline as its own character, its own entity. And the best metaphor for how I perceive bloodlines is in the movie, I believe it's called The Red Violin. It's produced decades ago. And I think it's called The Red Violin. And The Red Violin started off with this masterful craftsman. And the whole movie is about how the violin passes from character to character in this long chain link series of the story of like war and romance and love and loss and a series of critical events that occur around the violin. And even though there's not a single piece of dialogue in the violin, a single piece of dialogue from the violin, because it's a violin, right? It's an inanimate object. It doesn't have a soul, or does it? Right? Depending upon how we define soul. The main character of the entire movie is the violin, not the humans around it. And the holistic story is a moral that ties into the violin as a symbol. So if we analogically view a bloodline, any bloodline, as the red violin, with each of its owners being the child in question that is born, then what occurs is not just one individualistic story, but of one person of a bloodline. It's what is the story of the bloodline itself, spanning over years and years and years, generations, with each generation of people born within that bloodline as the respective owner of that red violin. And it's almost like the violin, the color red. Why red? like the color of blood, right? So it's like, speaking about this makes me want to see that movie again. I might watch it over the weekend. But so anyway, I view Bloodline as its own character, a character that should be respected, which is why we should take extreme caution into who we mix our bloodlines with. And when I say mix, I don't mean interracially, even though that's part of it. I mean, even within your own race, who it is that you are mixing with. Mixing as in the purest sense of the word mix. Who are you fusing your blood with? Who are you bequeathing, right? To whom are you bequeathing the next generation of your blood? Who's the next character in the storyline of your blood that you are bringing into being in this overall connected story of characters? And when you view it that way, you'll realize there's great value to your blood. Even if you regardless of your perspective, like in the Hitlerian perspective, bloodlines like mine might be viewed as trash because we're part black. In that one perspective, in the pro-black perspective, bloodlines like mine might be viewed as trash due to the opposite perspective because we're mixed with white. Same thing in a scientific perspective, which I think is the more accurate. It would depend upon which genes are activated and which genes are deactivated in the individual bloodline, regardless of whatever interracial mixing is going on or has gone on throughout the overall story of the bloodline, in determining the individual value. And from that perspective, I derive a lot of self-esteem in the character of my own blood because I know it's granted me a lot of advantages. The IQ being one of them, which if it was not at a minimum level, we wouldn't even be able to have this conversation. I wouldn't even be able to functionally hold this live stream right now in order to talk about the concepts that we are going in and out of different the metaphysical and figurative concepts that requires at bare minimum 115 to even understand. But with that said, that's not just it. Like, what about metabolism? What about cold resistance, bone density, heat resistance, UV resistance, right? There are so many different variables we could talk about, but that to a certain extent is superficial, pertaining to, not superficial, perhaps that's not the right word, but these are very finite variables or an array of variables to consider when talking about the overall value to any given respective bloodline. And then we can then beg the question, okay, what do you mean by value? Are you talking about intrinsic value or instrumental value? So what I just listed off was a series of instrumental values that are empirically measurable or testable in a replicable manner, right? That's standard science. But then what about the intrinsic value of a bloodline and how it plays consequentially into the greater development of the story of all society and how that's interconnected by a series of consequences indirectly or even directly, depending on how you want to look at it. It's a lot to consider. So I view my bloodline, as well as bloodlines in general, as their own characters, as if it is the hub and each respective person is the node that you simply branch off, your characters in the overall story of the red violin, which is the bloodline itself, as the blood passes from one character to the next, generation after generation after generation. And then when you zoom out, a much more beautiful story is told, a masterful story is told over generations. And that is an honorable burden that, when one is made self-aware of it, ties into how far you can actually develop that bloodline. Not just simply with your sexual choices, but how you live as a character, which directly influences what stressors activate or deactivate which genes, which then gets passed on to the next generation, which is exactly how selective breeding occurs in how we develop certain breeds of dog or certain breeds of cats, or how we bred I think it's called the silk moth or whatever it is, right? So, or different silkworms, right? It's the masterful application of stress wielded with the intent, the awareness that you are activating or likely to activate certain genes while deactivating others, and vice versa, in the development of what gets passed down or not, taking manual control over that in the proliferation and actualization of your bloodline as its own independent character. Okay, so all terms used are from Jason Cohn book Go Free, and the Go Free lexicon is a brilliant read and essential for white well-being. He is much more intelligent than I. Hey, I'll look into it, man. Thank you for the recommendation. I will legitimately look into that. I may not read it for the next couple of weeks because I'm really booked on time. Right, I block a time block my calendar. But thanks for the recommendation. I will look into it. All right, well said. I agree. Beyond race and ethnicity, that the bloodline must be consciously considered before marrying or reproducing. Many traits must be weighed and value placed on those traits. Yes. To whom you are, quote, to whom you are bequeathing. I'd also say the place, the state. We don't want to do so in a state cultural that harms our people, anti-whiteism. If done, you will get what the baby boomers did. Absolutely, 100%. We are on the same page as far as that goes. Yeah. Checking Facebook for comments. We are on the same page. Okay. All right. So ordinarily, these live streams are only supposed to be 30 minutes, 15 to 30 minutes. But they will naturally extend longer if I get in a passionate tirade or filibuster, right? Which I don't mean to bore people with, and if I'm getting multiple comments that deserve my attention, that is worthy of being addressed. And so far, I'm getting quite a few on different platforms, right? So what's going on Twitter? Okay, nothing on Twitter. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to wrap this up. Try to keep it at an hour. And thank you guys for tuning in. Remember, every single weekday, Monday through Friday at the top of this hour, right? Where I currently am, it is 2 a.m. since I'm in Europe. But I believe that is 9. What time is it? It is 8 p.m. EST. Sorry. It is every weekday at 8 p.m. EST. So, if you guys want to talk to me tomorrow about something else, and also the topic changes. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays pertain to philosophical content like this. Tuesdays and Thursdays are business and marketing related content pertaining to my marketing firm, helping entrepreneurs. So tomorrow we're not going to talk about this kind of content. Tomorrow we're most likely going to talk about trust in your brand, whatever company that is that you start up, whatever it is that you're building. And then the Wednesday after, the day after tomorrow, I'll talk about philosophical content like this as well. 2 a.m. Still doing the phasic sleeping? No, I'm not doing the polyphasic sleep. No, I just the majority of the companies that I have contracted with for my marketing firm are in America. So I have simply adjusted my overall sleeping schedule. I'm now sleeping a full 8 hours or so, give or take, every night. My body clock is shifted for American audiences, American clients that I work with off screen of calls like these. Okay, guys. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any sort of recommendations for any sort of specific requests or questions, like maybe next Wednesday, I'll talk more about bloodlines as how bloodlines should be treated as their own independent characters, worthy of respect, and how your bloodline in and of itself is a literal inheritance of value that should be treated as such in everything that you do pertaining to how you live and the sexual choices that you make. We could turn that into a multitude of calls, business mentality, a multitude of live streams. Or I could also talk about what Trex said in the comments. Do you think divorce rates have a lot to do with the culture you grew up? So if you guys have any questions like these, we could absolutely turn these into live streams. With that said, good night. Thank you, Ari Pages. Good night to anyone watching. Talk to you guys later. See you either tomorrow or Wednesday.